It's time for another exciting episode of Ask Us Anything on the Goggler Podcast. You've had those questions coming in, and let me tell you, this week's questions go deep. Go deep. First up, though, a question that's on everyone's mind about Madam Web. At Daphne M88 asks, describe how you felt with that Dakota Johnson interview and the editing process. So one part is for me, one part is for you, Bahir.
Okay.
And a second part to that question, what is the process like for you guys from start to finish with the interviews that you post on social? So we'll get into some inside baseball because we get questions like this a lot and many people don't necessarily know how it all works. So I'll talk about the how it all works first before getting into that specific Dakota Johnson interview.
Yeah.
How it works is twofold. There are two kinds of interviews that we do. The first kind is the more straightforward. We will cold email some people, hope they answer. That's how we got our interview with Phil Rosenthal.
Actually, let me correct you. He tweeted us first. He tweeted us after we had reviewed his show. Thank you for the kind words, etc. At which point we shot our shot and slid into his DM, and that worked out.
And then he gave us the email of his agent and handlers, and we organized his time, etc., etc. So that's one way of doing it. Usually it's authors or sometimes even musicians. It's hardly ever Hollywood celebrities because they pay no attention to a tiny little podcast out here in Malaysia. And then there's another kind of interview which involves a media junket. And this is usually to do with new TV shows or movies, distributors, streamers. They will reach out and they will be like, hey, would you be interested in interviewing so-and-so? He is in the upcoming movie or she is in the upcoming TV show.
And this is probably the more important statement in that sometimes a distributor and or a streamer would say, hey, we are going to put forward your name for an interview. So it's not even a done deal. They're going to propose Goggler to do a video interview, written interview, audio only interview with X, Y, and Z, and then whether or not the production team in the US or wherever accepts, then we do that interview. So it's not as simple as we get invited, it's a done deal.
What then happens is usually the teams in the US look through our work. We will send them links of other interviews we've done, and they vet us before agreeing and saying yes or no. That's how it all works. During a junket, there is a kind of gentleman's agreement, if you will. There is an unwritten rule in that they know that this thing is just to promote this work. It is purely an exercise in marketing and promotion. For the media outlet or the influencer or the blogger who is doing the interview, it is access to content that they wouldn't ordinarily get. So these things tend to be pretty safe and straightforward. It's particularly difficult when the show is crap. More often than not, the people making the movies know when they have a good product and they know when they have a bad product. It's very rare that you get a situation like Ant-Man and the Wasp in Quantumania where all of the writers and the directors were shocked at the audience's response to their movie because they thought they had a premium, great, fantastic, crowd-pleasing product on their hands. With something like Madam Web, you could tell that the people we were talking to knew what they had in their hands. And also because they have been through the process. We spoke about that process. We spoke about how the movie ended up the way it was because of common tropes that we've seen with bad movies in the past. Studio interference, reshoots, recuts, ADR, edits, all of that stuff. And so going into this was already a pretty stressful endeavor because you've got to make nice and you've got to have an interesting conversation with these people, regardless of what you thought of the film. And a lot of the time, that is my approach. I take off my reviewer hat and I put on my interviewer hat, which is always about getting information. Because whether it's a shitty movie or a great movie, there are artists and actors and directors who have worked on it. And I'm sure all of that makes for an interesting process. And I'm curious as to how this thing came to be. And so you have to wear two hats when you do these things. The second problem with Madam Web is that Dakota Johnson is infamous for being a difficult interviewee. And you can look online and check out her other interviews across her career. And she is somewhat cold. She gives one-word answers. She doesn't feel like she's truly engaging with the person that she's speaking to. And so that was the second stress going into this. I think it was made doubly worse by the fact that she too hadn't seen her movie and knew that it wasn't a particularly good product.
All of my work coming into it post said interview is always just to come out with a piece of content that is worth something. I'm not there to cover, I'm not there to polish really, because the point of the video, as you've said, is to sort of have a conversation. And I don't believe that my purview as a video editor is there to edit content either. For me, the process is always a lot more straightforward. You know, you line up the footage, you cut up between the questions, go from camera A to camera B, and if you have a camera C, go to there and find relevant footage of the conversation that you're having. But I think the problem with the Madam Web interview is that as a video editor, I'm having to look through the footage. So I'm already thinking as an audience member. How long does an answer go before it becomes too long? Has he repeated the answer earlier and he's now just going over himself again? The hard bit is that with Dakota Johnson, we didn't have any of that problem because she barely answered a question. So in a lot of ways, it's a bad thing because it was very easy. The edit for Dakota Johnson's video was very, very easy because she spoke for about 51 seconds of a 3.5 minute interview. So yeah, not much to do there.
Now, ordinarily, in a 3.5 minute interview, I'm the one who speaks for 51 seconds because I ask a question and then I'm hoping that the interviewee engages with me and has a lot to say about what I ask. And when I'm crafting those questions as well, I come up with a mix of open-ended questions, things that lead possibly to other questions and more interesting answers, as well as some specific questions because they may be questions that I really want answered.
Yeah.
My job also is to just keep things professional. I knew Dakota Johnson was going to be difficult, and so I had to keep trying to get her to engage in any way that I could.
There isn't really anything important left on the editing room floor. That footage came through at about 3 minutes 30, 3 minutes 20 seconds, and I think the final output's about 3:10. So again, I didn't have to cut anything out.
We also only tend to have 4 to 5 minutes with these people, depending on how big a star they are, how many other journalists they have to speak to. On occasion, we're lucky and we get 8 to 10 minutes. Sometimes we get 15 minutes. Those are absolutely fantastic interviews because you can have proper conversations with them and you can get into the weeds about the work that they actually do.
Just to sort of throw it out there, you once had a 30-minute conversation with Steven Soderbergh. That video is online on our YouTube page. That was interesting because, again, I think the key about what you do, and I really appreciate it after having edited other people's interviews before, is that you're not doing an interview. You're having a conversation. So it's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of like both you and the guest butting into each other because they're excited about something or they want to correct a fallacy or they want to make a point. That might sound like not a great traditional TV interview, but in what we're doing, I think keeping it slightly underneath formal is the best because you're having a conversation with essentially someone who's an artist who likes what they do, who are in it for reasons other than just money, potentially.
And I think that's also very important because you want to engage them in a conversation. It shouldn't just be question, answer, because that's really boring. And the one thing that I was taught to do very, very early on as a journalist is active listening. Sure, you have your list of 5 to 10 questions because you need backups, like in the case of Madam Web and Dakota Johnson when she suddenly doesn't give you the answers you want, so you have to jump from question to question to question. But most cases, when you have an engaged interviewee, you actively listen to what they have to say, and oftentimes your next question comes from what they're saying as opposed to what you have on the page. And I think that makes for the most fun conversations. We're also hardly ever interested in the gotcha questions. We don't care about their personal lives and what's going on there. I know a lot of interviewers tend to ask that because the editors want the clickbaity material. But for us, our philosophy is very simple. There are maybe a handful of people in the world who can make these kinds of movies. If you are giving $250, $300 million to someone, that person is pretty smart and capable. And we're genuinely curious about speaking to these incredibly smart people to find out how they do what they do.
I think a big part of that is the fact that we come to it from the point of view of the piece of work. We're not there. We're not interested to talk to Tom Cruise, the personality. We're not interested in talking to Tom Cruise, the famous person. We're interested to talk to Tom Cruise, the filmmaker, the producer, the writer. Coming into it with that mindset shifts the kinds of questions you'll end up asking, because your focus is then on the work and not about the Dunkin' Donut meme that Ben Affleck had.
That was a very long answer, but we hope we answered your question and gave you some insight as to how all of this works. Yes, it's complicated. It's very time consuming. You're asking about start to finish. It is a process because there's lots of research involved before you ask a question. It isn't just about watching the movie as well. A lot of the time, what I do is I watch other interviews that they've done to get a feel of how they talk, what they engage with, and also so I don't ask the same damn question that everyone else is asking.
Also, just another random piece of information. A lot of these interviews happen at like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 6 in the morning.
Because of the time difference.
So that's great for your wife.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Next question by Brendan Ho Sheng Ven. What would be the one thing you value the most when it comes to making adaptations based on an existing source material? You do this one first.
So I'm assuming, Brandon, that this comes off the back of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And sure, we've spoken about adaptations in the past. And I think I have a very clear idea of what I want. I never think that a film or a TV show is going to replace that work. I always see it as something supplemental to the work, because I understand that all of them are different mediums and all of them do different things and are good at different things. So for me, the thing that I value the most is if they capture the tone and the spirit of the original, tell a good story while not betraying what the author or creator had in mind. So for example, if you take something like The Last of Us, which I think is an excellent, superb adaptation, they knew what they were doing for TV is completely different from a video game. Yes, we use the word cinematic to describe video games all the time, but it's bullshit. A video game is a video game. A movie and a TV show are movies and TV shows. A video game has that added element of interactivity. You are controlling the character. You are doing stuff. So it's very different from a movie. And the creators of the show are very well aware of that. And so they actually rejigged a lot of those elements so it works better on screen. And I think that was very, very smart. They changed certain story elements, but most of all, it was the execution. So even if you look at the standalone episode where the two girls are together and they're focused on the two girls and their story, it is completely different from the version that you play because you are controlling the outcome of that story. Here, you are still a passive observer. And so being a passive observer, the emotional hooks are different from when you are holding that controller and have a certain amount of say over what happens.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's capturing the tone and spirit of the original. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm not looking for that at all. Sure, there may be some really cool moments in a comic book or a novel that could be recreated in a nice way on screen. If they do that, if they pull it off well, great. Otherwise, I'm okay.
I think I'm looking for, on some level, fidelity. I'm looking for a faithful adaptation of a show. I don't mean that it needs to follow beat by beat.
Those are often the worst.
Those are often the worst. Yeah, they tend to drag. They tend to stop in random ways because a book's got 3 chapters on what he's thinking about his breakfast that day. And I think that's also ineffective to that adaptation. However, my biggest gripe is, because I feel like it's the easiest win, is when, as the joke goes, when Disney does a race or a gender swap of characters. I don't feel that that's necessary. I think, if anything, I feel like that undermines the arguments they're trying to make, because I don't need an African American Ariel. I've got Tiana. I don't need an Asian Snow White because I've got Mulan. I think the problem is when you give up on the source material. So a perfect, easy example for me, because I'm a comic book nerd and my thing is Green Lantern. I don't need an African American or an Asian or a woman version of the main Green Lantern character, Hal Jordan, because I've got an African American Green Lantern in Jon Stewart. I've got a female Green Lantern in Jessica Cruz. I don't need that version, right? I don't need a black Bruce Wayne.
For me, the argument has always been to create a new character, which is why I think it's ridiculous when they talk about a female James Bond.
Yes.
I'm like, create a new character that is cool and kick-ass and does stuff and make the audience fall in love. For me, the idea when that conversation comes up is that it's steeped in so much corporate capitalism. They're trying to use an existing IP and trick you.
It's a shortcut.
It's a shortcut. They're lazy.
That's always the first question when it comes to adaptations. Are you keeping with the spirit of the way the things are written? Yes, James Bond, as he was written in the books, is extremely problematic in 2024.
It also makes for a really fascinating character, because you don't want characters that are 100% good and noble and pure.
Yeah.
They're not fun to watch.
Yes, the James Bond character from the early movies are problematic, but those were a product of, one, its source, and two, of the times they were made. So I think if you're going to adapt something, even something as random as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, my big issue with Rachel Zegler as Snow White, and even in her initial responses to why her Latinx performer is playing a character named Snow White, the problem is it's in the name. The character Snow White is named Snow White because she's got skin as white as snow. You can't then have an African American person be called Snow White. I'm not saying I don't want to see African Americans on screen. I'm saying she cannot be Snow White. Your African American child, your Chinese child, your Malay child can be Snow White. That's fine. That's not a problem. That's the splitting of hairs thing that sometimes gets me into trouble.
No, I don't think it's the splitting of hairs. I don't think that's the problem. I think it's
the disingenuous way that a corporation is pushing character representation by doing this.
Correct. It's the lazy way out for the corporation, because they're not putting the investment where it's really necessary and where it really counts by hiring more Asian writers and Black writers and Latinx writers and getting them to create new characters and tell their own stories. Because you know what? That's too risky, bro. There's no existing IP. So if we spend all that money, what if it doesn't work?
We're starting to stray away from your question here, Brandon. But it has worked, right? Princess and the Frog, Raya and the Last Dragon, Encanto. They work. Coco's huge. When I was in Disneyland, Coco was everywhere, and I loved it because I love Coco. And I think it's that becomes the problem.
It's also a uniquely American problem, I feel, in that I think Americans are a lot more sheltered with regards to the content they're exposed to. And so representation for us is less of a problem because obviously we grew up watching a lot more foreign content. So Hollywood movies weren't our only source of heroism. And so we didn't have to just identify with Superman or Peter Parker. We had Rajinikanth and we had Jet Li and we had P. Ramlee and we had all of these other locally flavored things where we got to see heroes on screen.
Yeah.
But we've strayed into a discussion about diversity and wokeness as well. But
yeah,
you get the point we're trying to make, Brandon. Next question is by Marsha Arby, who asks, how do you move on from heartbreaking endings? Now, I wanted Bahir to ask this question because, as you know from listening to this podcast, Bahir has no soul. So I am curious, when he encounters something that moves him emotionally, how do you move on, Bahir? What do you do?
Can I just say, I love a fucking heartbreaking ending. As much as I love a good happy ending, I love a movie that just kills you at the end. I don't want a weeping movie, but like a movie that just tells you that, you know what, things are not that great, but our time is up. Move on with your life.
Especially if it earns it.
I think that's important. And how do I move on from a heartbreaking ending? Okay, so this is not how you probably asked this question, but the way I will answer this question is, for example, when one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, gets cancelled essentially towards the end of its first season run and they have to scramble.
That is a heartbreaking ending.
That's a fucking heartbreaking ending, right? And I think how I move on is I just keep rewatching it. I just rewatch that show all the time. A heartbreaking ending just means that the film has done its job.
I tend to embrace those heartbreaking endings as well. I don't think I necessarily move on from them, especially if a movie or a TV show has affected me in that way. It often ends up being a point of inspiration for something else. It's rare that a TV show or a movie has such an impact where it lingers with you for a long time, right? A lot of the stuff we watch, we're like, oh, okay, that was good, that was cool, great, trying to move on to the next thing. But then occasionally you come across something that really changes your life, like changes your worldview and way of thinking and moves you in a certain way. And for those things, I want to hold on to it. So like you, I'm happy to like rewatch them and re-experience them because I know they made me feel something. And the most important movies and TV shows always make you feel something because it's all value judgments, right? Like there's no objectivity.
Yeah.
Like you can have a favorite movie, Bahir, and you can try and justify to me why it's your favorite movie. But if I don't like it, I'm just not going to like it.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with these things that really affect you on an emotional level.
The other sort of really good indication is when at the end of it, I want to sit through the closing credits.
Because you need the time to process.
But also, I've noticed that I can't, honestly, I was sitting here thinking to myself, what's a heartbreaking ending film or TV show that I can think of? And I can't think of anything at the moment. But I find that, especially when they're a heartbreaking thing or they're a sad ending, that I feel like the closing credits is almost by design. I don't think the director gave up. I don't think the director, okay, last frame's done, I'm going to move on and write my comedy now. Because I feel like the music choice, the way this is again bullshit. I'm fairly sure this is bullshit. But I feel like the credits run a little slower. I feel, like the black on the screen feels blacker. I'm sure that's all bullshit. But I feel like I want to sit through all that because it's not just to honor the filmmakers, but it's also just because I need that 45 seconds, that 60 seconds to just sit in my emotions so then I can then subsequently face the rest of the world.
Yeah.
At Damon Kadri asks, who is your go-to local director?
We don't have one.
I will say, I don't have a go-to local director. However, there are some producers and or directors, someone like Joel, who I will go, actually, I'm confident coming into this that it will be decent, that it won't be terrible.
You're willing to give it a chance.
Because of what I know they've done in the past.
And the reason we don't have a go-to local director is also due to a question of body of work. And so, sure, if I go back far enough, I will always say P. Ramlee because he has a massive body of work for you to consider. It's easy to say someone like Steven Spielberg if you're talking Hollywood because he has 36 movies. And so when you have 36 movies, there's stuff to analyze and study, and you can figure out what his good movies were versus his bad movies and why they are so. But even if you look at a good Malaysian director, like an old-timer like Uwe Hajisari, for example, he did Perempuan Isteri dan ... But then between, say, Bual Laju Laju and Hanyut, there was like a 12-year gap. And then after Hanyut, I don't think he's done anything since. I haven't heard of anything. Yeah. So this body of work is far and few. Even Aziz M. Osman, who did XX-Ray, which is one of my favorite movies, Phenomena, Femina, he's been constantly working for a long time, but not everything's been great. Like, there are a lot of hits and misses. I think the same goes for Shamsul and Shafiq Yusof. Sure, they've got a lot of movies they've been making from the time they started in the 2000s, but it's really a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
Local directors who I think have been quite consistent, a person who is no longer directing and hasn't directed for a long time is Amir Muhammad, because he's made a lot of documentaries. And I think all of his documentaries, Lips to Lips, Last Communist, Big Durian, Malaysian Gods, Apa Khabar Orang Kampung. Like, they were all really, really good documentaries telling stories that no other Malaysian was telling and no media outlet would touch because they were dangerous stories, right? He was talking about Chin Peng, for God's sake.
They were perceived dangerous.
Sorry, my bad. I was towing the BN line.
Let's give Amir Muhammad his due credit here. They were perceived as dangerous.
So, yes. So, I think there are some local producers and directors, when we see their names, like Joel So, for example, we're like, oh, I'm curious. What has he done this time?
Adrian Tay is another one.
Yes, because he's always quite ambitious and trying new things constantly. And I think we appreciate that and kind of respect that. So, we're always going to check it out. I think the director of La Luna is someone we're definitely going to be watching, M. Raihan Halim. We're very excited about his work. I don't think we have a go-to Malaysian director.
Yeah.
So we've got two questions from @GammaRay07. The first question is, in this day and age where we have to be politically correct, are comedians like Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock still relevant? My answer to that is yes, more than ever. And I come from a very different place than I think a lot of people, in that I think nothing should be sacred. I think you can make fun of anything, but the joke has to be good. Like that Singaporean comedian or not Singaporean comedian, that lady who was making fun of MH370. I didn't have a problem that she was making a joke out of MH370. I had a problem that it was a really lazy and bad joke. I think there are clever jokes that could be made about any situation. And I think a joke is a joke and it shouldn't inform your worldview. When it starts informing your worldview about something, then you really need to start reading more books. But also, Jon Stewart was asked this question at a talk he was giving, and I don't know where I saw it. I think it just popped up on my Instagram one day. And his response was, there shouldn't be a line, nothing is sacred, but also, why does everyone keep asking these questions to comedians and about comedians? When was the last time you asked a politician this question? Because the politicians say horrible, horrible things on a daily basis, and we have no idea where the line is.
My thing about being politically correct, specifically in the realm of stand-up comics or comedians or whatever, telling a joke doesn't mean you have to insult someone. A joke shouldn't be insulting. Pull the curtains back, full disclosure, some of the funniest Instagram videos that I see are all about my religion, but they're never insulting, right? They're not poking fun at my religion. They're not poking fun at my belief.
Or even if they're poking fun at the eccentricities of people who practice the religion as opposed to the religion itself.
Even if you make fun of the religion, again, as long as you're not crossing that line of being insulting, I think that's the difference, right? The thing about Carlin's 7 words that you can't say on TV or whatever, that is completely politically incorrect. However, he wasn't insulting anybody. He wasn't saying an American conservative is an idiot for not liking these words and don't want it to be on TV.
He was making a point about censorship as opposed to anything else. I think the same goes with Chappelle, Chris Rock, Ricky Gervais. Every stand-up comedian will come up with this line about, oh, you should never punch down, you should never punch down. You know what? Sometimes punching down is incredibly funny if the joke is very good. But yet again, if the joke is good, because Dave Chappelle is not out there kicking homeless people in the teeth. He is telling a joke. Words aren't immoral, actions are immoral, right? And so that is the big distinction. Also, if you look at the context of their sets as a whole, all of these knee-jerk reactions always come out about Chappelle, Gervais, Chris Rock, among others, are people who are taking individual lines out of context. Chappelle isn't punching down. He is often commenting on the state of society and their reactions to people who do, or to people who actually say the things he says. And I think there is that nuance there, and that's what makes it funny, and that's what makes it good commentary as well. And so there are bad comedians, and those bad comedians always go for the lazy, the fat joke, the lazy racist joke, the lazy sexist joke.
Yeah.
They aren't good comedians. They aren't funny.
The specific examples brought out here, like Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock, they're storytellers. You're going on a journey with them where they're telling you a story. Yes, taken out of context, a bit about him, like you said, Uma, threatening to kick homeless people in the teeth feels wrong. However, in the storytelling of it all, in the previous 10 minutes of that bit, that final kicker, pun unintended, is funny, is contextually relevant.
Exactly. It's understanding the structure of a joke and a comedic narrative and how these individuals employ it. And I think that's interesting. There are all kinds of comedians. There are some comedians who don't curse. There are some comedians who are incredibly family friendly. There are some comedians who make their money out of being offensive. And the really smart ones are offensive in a very, very smart way. And it is incredibly funny stuff. So yes, I think it's important. I think all of these comedians are relevant as long as they still write well and still make you laugh.
So second question from Gamma Ray, scare time. What are your top 3 horror movies ever scarier than The Exorcist?
So you're not a big fan of horror and you've only recently come to enjoy horror movies. I don't necessarily have a top 3, although I think just remove the line scarier than Exorcist, because very few things are. Gamma Ray 07, and Exorcist is a masterclass in horror filmmaking. So that's always on any list of horror movies I recommend to people. I don't have a top 3, but I have, say, a list for people, and I think Ian and I gave you this list as well, Bahir, for people who want to get into horror. You know, Exorcist, Alien, Audition, The Shining, Don't Look Now. These are all like landmark movies in horror that you have to watch if you want to learn about horror or if you just want to get scared silly.
The ones that stood out to me was like It Follows was fan-fucking-tastic. There's also a mini series out of Britain that I think few people know, created by Charlie Brooker of Black Mirror fame, called Dead Set. Have you seen that one?
I have seen Dead Set.
Dead Set is fantastic. It's zombie horror, but it's still horror. I think, again, if the question is scarier than The Exorcist, then I don't know the answer. I can't give you one, but these are a few off the top of my head that I really enjoyed.
Top of my list of shows in recent years has been Haunting of Hill House as well. I think that is a series that is beautifully crafted, but also genuinely scary episode to episode, but with like a proper story and an emotional hook at the end as well. There are loads of shows that are scary but don't have that because they're all just like jump scares all the time.
I will say a sort of slight choice out of left field. Completely not scary, but the way it's designed and told is fantastic. Evil, I think it just got its final season order. It works for people like you and me, right? Because I'm a believer in a higher power, you less so, but the show never really sets its foot down about whether or not this is real or just psychological. And I love that investigation into what horror and what these horrifying things are. What is it that goes bump in the night?
At Travesty asks, recently an OG YouTuber decided to change direction and talk about movies positively because he just made an indie movie and discovered that filmmaking is actually hard.
No shit, Sherlock.
He decided that it isn't nice to be brutal with terrible reviews. What's your take on this? I saw the news about this, and there has been some hoo-ha on his YouTube page. Basically, he refused to review Madam Web.
Okay.
And I think he has recently gone into indie filmmaking with a Kickstarter film or something like that.
Sure.
Here's my problem with this. My problem with this is I think any film reviewer or film critic or person who wants to talk about movies needs to understand how movies are made and how the industry works. You can't just watch something and go, oh, I didn't like it because blah, blah, blah. It's not enough. I think you need to understand the ins and outs of filmmaking. But even when you do, I think it is your duty as an honest critic or reviewer to actually say it as it is. Once again, I go back to what I said earlier. They are all value judgments. just because I think something is the best thing ever, it doesn't make it the best thing ever. I may have a list of arguments and I will try to convince you, but I don't think there is one specific thing that makes one movie better than another movie. It's just like art.
Yeah.
Why would you love Leonardo da Vinci and then say he's better than Van Gogh? Like what?
Yeah.
Like how?
Yeah.
How do you make that value judgment, right? And so I think this YouTuber, it's Chris Tuckman, by the way, but I think suddenly to say, you know what, this is a positive space and I'm going to celebrate movies instead of criticizing them is bullshit. Because the way you celebrate movies is to critique them. It's a symbiotic relationship. The only reason Hollywood is where it is and Malaysia is where it is because there is a rich culture of criticism. Filmmakers, actors, they learn from that. It isn't just people there to shit on something for the sake of it, right?
Yeah.
These are all people who love the art form, have studied the art form, and help make the art form better.
And I think that's important. You're not there to shit on a movie. We're not here to shit on Madam Web. We wanted Madam Web to be a successful film because we love movies. However, we also owe it to people who listen to us, who look to us to save their
20 ringgit.
To not have them waste their money. So when we come to something, we're reviewing it as a person who would have spent money on that thing.
Celebrating movies involves constructive criticism. There is no two way about it.
Yeah.
Celebrating movies just isn't you going, oh, I love this. This is great.
But also, I'm sorry, Chris Stuckman. Did you just realize making movies is hard?
Yeah, that's the other thing, bro. Like, what the fuck? You've been doing this for years.
Yeah, and it's just like, wait, did
and
you
you're not
just
stupid,
figure this out?
So I'm pretty sure you know. So that's just the lamest excuse ever.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've made movies and they weren't very good probably. But, you know, I think the point is that you want to come into it with a certain level of fairness, right? We're not here just to shit on something just for the giggles. That's not the point of what we're doing. Next question, Pajoka Fanatic 91 says, in honor of Oppenheimer's 7 wins at the BAFTAs, which do you think is Nolan's most underrated movie? Interstellar.
Fuck you.
Uma
if anything,
loves Interstellar.
If anything, Interstellar
Guys,
is
I think you
so
should send
incredibly
Uma Interstellar
overrated
stuff.
It is
just send it to
his
our
worst
Instagram page
next to The Dark
Uma
Knight Rises.
Loves Interstellar.
Blech.
I don't know. I mean, for me, the problem here is that there's only 2 choices, right? There's Memento, there's The Prestige.
I was just going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
And even so, I wouldn't use the word underrated. For me, I think The Prestige is his best film. It is my favorite Nolan movie. And yet again, value judgment, it is my favorite Nolan movie. You may have a different one. You may even like Interstellar. You would be wrong, but you may like it. I love The Prestige. I have seen it so many times. But if you ask me most underrated, Insomnia. Not enough people have watched that movie, and it is absolutely fantastic. Both Al Pacino and Robin Williams. Also, I'm sorry, but your third movie in, and you get Al Pacino and fucking Robin Williams
that's
in
bullshit,
a crime thriller, fucking gold.
That's fucking bullshit, man.
Very few people talk about it because it's a remake, but I think it still has that Nolan signature all over it. So underrated, Insomnia. My favorite is The Prestige.
It's hard to use the word underrated with Nolan because a lot of his work gets so much attention already.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. I think Memento, The Prestige, and you're right, Insomnia is the 3 most overlooked. I won't say underrated, but probably overlooked.
Final question comes from @StraightFromTheKernel. What is the best way to watch Dune Part 2 that's not in IMAX? So, we're big fans of IMAX just because we love the experience of going to a cinema that is completely overwhelming. But that said, I am really curious to see Dune Part 2 in Onyx.
Oh.
Because it's that LED type display.
Yeah.
You know, the blacks are blacker. There is a certain sharpness to it. And I think this movie might lend itself to Onyx. We haven't seen Dune 2 yet, so we're not sure. But Onyx would be my first call. I am not a fan of Screen X and all of those gimmicky things. So for me, that detracts from the actual movie. But if you're not going to IMAX, I will say just find a big screen, maybe even big screen at MBO or GSC, or try Onyx. I'm going to try Onyx.
My only problem with Onyx is that I agree with you. I think the screen is lovely. I think the projection is fantastic. Oh, it's not a projection.
It's not a projection, yeah.
It's not a projection, yeah. But I think the screen is lovely. I just feel it's too small.
Yeah, the Onyx screens aren't big enough.
The problem is that the Onyx really feels like watching TV. However, your sitting position is not ideal for that watching TV. It almost feels like it's too high up. That is my issue with Onyx. I love the screen. I just feel it's too small. I need it bigger.
Maybe try Onyx. And then if you really like the film, you might be inspired to check it out in IMAX.
I would say look for one of the newer halls. I'm not going to name brands, but look for one of the newer halls just so you get the new projectors and the new sound systems. That's important, I think.
For us, the most important thing is when it comes to a movie like Dune, don't wait. Just watch it on the big screen. This thing was built for the big screen, just like Oppenheimer and any of the kind of major blockbusters out there that are shot using IMAX cameras. It's a completely different experience, and it's just not the same watching it on your TV at home, no matter how good your TV at home is.
It's not a great experience, yeah.
And those are all your questions for today. Keep them coming. Don't just look out for our Instagram posts. Just ask us at any time, and we have to say that's happening. Thank you to some of you for just randomly DMing us during the week going, hey, I got a question for you. It's really cool. Keep it coming. We've got more questions to answer next Friday. Ask us anything. You know what to do. All of our social media feeds are at GogglerMY. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.